I'm Michelle Briggins, and the Director of Missions at Austin Christian Fellowship. Over the last few weeks, we've been participating in conversations about racism. We've talked to pastors and city leaders. We've heard from our own Will Davis Jr., our senior pastor, as he's delivered messages about the theological framework about racism. Today, we have what we feel is one of the most important steps you can take in this issue. We are bringing together friends and family of ACF to have a conversation to model for you an example of how to have one of these conversations in your own home. This roundtable discussion will feature people from different ACF communities talking about race, talking about prejudice, and talking about steps to take toward racial reconciliation. These are our friends that come from different ethnic backgrounds, different generations, different places in our city, but they have several things in common. They love Jesus, they love each other, and they have a willingness to listen. So we ask you to join us as we dive into this. Afterwards, I'll be back to talk with you about additional resources and opportunities we have for you to take in your steps against racism.
Well, I want to, first of all, thank you all for being here for this conversation and for creating this opportunity. One of the things that we always talk about, one of my favorite statements is this, is that there is no crisis where Christ is. Mm-hmm. And so for the church, this is just what we do. We have difficult conversations, and we believe that our God is able to use even the most painful of circumstances in order to heal not only a nation, but to heal the entire world. And so today we're getting ready to have a courageous conversation that Christ is right in the center of. And we get an opportunity to talk about race, and we get an opportunity to talk about anti-racism. And so as we frame this conversation, one of the things that I want to do is frame this as a conversation that is going to move the ball forward, and it's going to cause the church to be seen as the place that God made. And what I mean by that is there really is only one race, which is the human race that God created. Now, because of God's creativity and because of his imagination, he has many beautiful colors in the human race. We can celebrate that. And we can also discuss the things that are difficult to talk about that happen between us that cause us not to see each other as one race. And so today, I just want to thank you all for the courage to come together and have that conversation. So I spoke with Candace before we got started, and I told her that she was going to be the first one to get to answer this question. Yay. I would like for you to define for us, what is racism? And what is the difference between not being a racist and being anti-racist?
I think it'd be easier to start with what is an anti-racist. An anti-racist is someone that does more than just says, like, I'm not a racist. It's someone who fights for a cause. It's easy to say, oh, well, I'm not this way, so it doesn't matter, it doesn't affect me. But it's not fair to let something go on that as a Christ follower that we're not stepping into. So if racism is existing and we're allowing it to exist, then we're just as guilty as the person who is a racist. I remember this woman talked about her and her experience in growing up in the Holocaust time and era, was that to be silent was just as bad as the people that were inflicting the harm. So I think to say that you're not a racist, it's not enough. It's not enough. I think honestly, when people say that, it's to excuse themselves from having to engage. It's to excuse themselves from having to care. And maybe it's also an inability of not knowing what they need to do or how they need to do it.
I'd probably just add that maybe not so much overt actions, but even the absence of, to me, it's about when I or anyone, based on what they see, places themselves above that person, if it's skin color or where they think they're from or even the neighborhood they live in, I think there's this elevation of self over someone else. Even if it's in your thoughts and your heart, you've committed the act of racism. You know, I think the first step to moving beyond that is acknowledging that we all have biases. And I think that is part of our Genesis 3 world that we all suffer from today. And so when I said the passive actions, it's especially as a white leader in the community and in the business marketplace here in Austin, I have a responsibility to recognize those biases and implement processes, implement checks and balances to make sure that those biases are not ignored, and that we don't end up with a homogeneous workplace or leadership decisions being made by like-minded, like-looking people, and that there is some diversity there. So I think indirectly, without even knowing it, if you're not actively acknowledging those biases, you could be contributing to some racism.
Racism for me, people thinking that I'm less than because of just the skin that I'm in. I'm unworthy of being any type of leader, which I've experienced. The hierarchy of I'm superior, you're inferior because I'm female and black. So I get a double whammy. And just not, like you all said, not saying anything, not wanting to put equality into education and into being able to purchase a home, all of those redlining, all that stuff, it happens. And I've seen it and experienced it. The anti-racist would be the one who would stand up and say, no, we all are equal no matter what color, no matter where we come from, no matter what background or whatever. You, even as a Christian, have the right to have the rights that I have, because we don't have the rights that white people have. I don't know why. I don't know why they hate the skin I'm in.
I look at racism also is when you have the power to also oppress people, or you have the power to influence in terms of hiring, firing, promotions, because the effect of racism is economic, it's social, it's all those things. I also look at it too as racism is that, I think you mentioned it too, is that I think that when you don't say anything and you know it's wrong, it's almost like the silent majority. You have a few people that are very vocal about racism in terms of their actions, but you have a lot of people that don't say anything that could say something. And I think that the issue with racism is that it's quiet sometimes, it's unspoken. It's one of those things where it's there and you don't even know it, and people feel comfortable with it. And people need to get out of this comfort zone. They need to hit it head on because it's there. It manifests itself in so many different ways. Again, tangible ways, intangible ways in terms of said, unsaid. That's where I look at it in terms of what racism does.
So I think one of the hardest things about racism as a white man is that it feels like the overt acts of racism, acts of violence or overt discrimination, like those are easy to identify. It's more the things that are happening day in and day out. The redlining and economic sort of segregation of our country, the lost opportunities. I think that right now, where I am as a person, I need to step up. That being non-racist isn't enough. That I need to take the time to get uncomfortable, to listen to people who have been living this life that is foreign to me. And not try to act on their behalf, because I don't even know what they need, right? But I know I need to do something, and that silence isn't enough. We've kind of all said some of the same things about silence. There's an MLK quote that goes along similar lines that, I won't remember the words of my enemies, but I'll remember the silence of my friends.
So I'll just simply add that from the standpoint of Scripture, Paul said we're not supposed to look at anybody through the eyes of men anymore. We're supposed to look at people through the eyes of God. We have the mind of Christ, and that makes the playing field level. So racism is, as Christ followers, I'm just talking about Christians now because it exists in the church, it's still looking at people through the eyes of men and letting those filters of how we are raised, our fears, our hurts, the institutional stuff we're not even aware of, build up those filters. So I finally look at Sherwin Patton and I see all this stuff on him that as a Christian I don't get to see. So it's allowing those filters to remain and projecting on you prejudgments based on what I see outside of you, which Christ doesn't do, fortunately. He says we shouldn't look that way. To be anti-racist to me is if somebody gets cancer, they're not just opposed to cancer, they're anti-cancer. They're going to do everything they can to extricate the cancer from their body. It's not that I'm just sad it's here, I'm sorry it's here, I wish it wasn't here. I'm going to fight it till I die. That for me has been the revelation of what anti-racism is.
So I want to move us into our second question. What should we as Christians engage in and care about? Or let me say it like this. Why should we as Christians engage in and care about this? And what are we called to do as Christians? What are we called to do?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind, like when you asked that question, is like, well, okay, as a Christian, what are we to do, period? We are to be the light of the world. And what do you do with the light? I mean, Scripture, you don't have this light and you don't store it under your bed. Why would you do that? You put it on top of a stool in the middle of the room and you light the room. So in regards to what we are to do, we are to be a light. And even if we are a light, we don't belong under the bed, like we said. We don't belong silent. We don't belong where our light shouldn't be. I'm doing the apartment life ministry. I don't know if they had mentioned that. And I had mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to someone else. And they came back, and they're believers, just saying, and rightfully so, they're concerned for me. I mean, it's an epidemic, and there's all this, racial reconciliation and all these protests and things that are going on. And for someone that lives in another town, they don't know. They just know what they see on TV. So they're just concerned for me. Why would you move downtown during a pandemic with all this stuff going on, literally moments from your door? And that really offended me, because I said, because why wouldn't God want me to move down there? Like, why, of course he would call me there. Of course he would call me into that uncomfortable, hard, challenging place. So why should we engage? Because God desires us to. Because as a Christian, we are to love people and we are to love God. And how do you love God? You love God by serving and loving his people.
My number one priority in life is to glorify God. And number two is to love others as he has commanded me to. I don't know how you follow Christ and not be concerned. The word that keeps coming to mind is empathy. So sympathy would be watching from afar and saying, I feel bad for them. Empathy is watching from afar and saying, I'm going to go be with them. And feeling the pain. And so for me, I want to exhibit a kind of empathic love.
1 John said, if you can't love your neighbor, you're not a Christian. You don't love the person sitting next to you, you probably don't understand the love of Christ. So that's the why. It's the heart of Christ, and he died to make it real. The what is that wonderful, simple verse that you gave us back in our original conversation on this thing a few weeks ago, was do justice from Isaiah. Justice is getting what you're due. In the legal system, justice can be getting what you're due. If you break the law, you get what you're due. You get a ticket for speeding, or you get a sentence or whatever. In the church, we are rarely to seek justice for ourselves. God gives us our justice. We are to seek justice for those who can't get it for themselves. So if I see that Kim, my sister, is being mistreated and being denied access to jobs or to education or to fair representation in criminal proceedings or whatever because of her skin color, that's injustice, and I am to go do justice for her.
I don't know about anyone else around the table, but how many times have, when encountering an older white man who has racist views, have you heard people say, "Oh, he's just like that," right, and dismiss it and accept it? So, oh, that's that generation, right? But we need to make sure that's not our generation too, right? We need to make sure that our kids don't say that about us someday.
In one sentence, what would you say to the person who is afraid to have the conversation because they're uncomfortable? In one sentence, just know that I'm uncomfortable too.
So you want me to say, in one sense, what I would say to the person who's struggling with their comfort zone? You gave up the right to cling to your comfort zone when Jesus gave up his for you.
I would ask a person to try to put themselves in a person of color's shoes from a standpoint of not just what you see on TV, but see what a person of color deals with on a daily basis.
Focus on listening, not worrying about what you need to say.
What keeps coming to mind is just create in me a clean heart, renew my mind, because my heart was not clean, and so I had to renew my spirit and all that. So.
You think you know, but what God has for you outside of what you know, outside of what your comfort zone is so much more beautiful than you can imagine. And if you knew, you wouldn't be scared right now.
If you struggle with this issue and struggle with knowing the right thing to say, the problem is probably that you haven't listened enough.
What are some things that you're already doing to be anti-racist? And what are some more things we can do together?
I think the first thing is to listen and read and learn and identify your own biases, identify your own prejudices, and own that stuff. Acknowledge how your history has shaped the way that you view the world. Because until you've done that and taken that first step, it's hard to make any progress. And then engage in conversations like this, engage with the people of color who are in your life and hear about their experience and see how it differs from yours. But then don't just sit silently with that information, right? Take that information to use, in whatever ways that are available to you, and perhaps that's joining a protest or a protest, or speaking out on social media, not to be divisive, but to let your people of color who are in your life know that you stand with them and that you're not the silent majority.
And so I had to look at my authentic self. I had to dig deep to find my authentic self because I have so much cover up that I wanted to be someone else. But until I learned myself, I could not help anybody else. So I had to look at myself deeply before I could even try to extend a helping hand, truly extend a helping hand.
Over the 4th of July weekend, we had the whole Davis clan over minus my son and daughter-in-law up in Denver, but both my daughters and their husbands and Susie and me. And the conversation just turned to this topic. Two very passionate young women, one in their 30s, one in their 20s, and their husbands, and they had a lot to say about this. And it was really fascinating for Susie and me to listen. And the conversation was not about what's going on out there and what's being said. The conversation was very much about what are we learning about ourselves. And it's I think as a white person, it's important that I say, what am I learning about myself? And seeing this, when I hear sweet Kim Patton say it as her first part of her answer, who I know what she's been through, and she starts with, well, I had to look at my own heart first. Well, that's pretty humbling. I heard Kim say in this conversation, I heard Bishop Wilkerson say a few weeks ago, because I'm white, I have an obligation to speak up because I'm more likely to be heard than somebody who's black. See something, say something. If it's just African Americans who are saying something, then they may or may not be heard. But if leaders in the white community are saying something because they see it, then perhaps it will help. And he just said, I feel like I need your help. Kim said tonight, I need your help because they don't always listen to me.
But what we saw is that we saw that this institution of racism is a machine of its own. And if we did nothing right now, it would self-perpetuate, it would be in perpetuity. So what we're doing is a conversation this time is trying to figure out how to dismantle our piece of it that we can influence. So that's how I look at it, as a conversation by conversation, trying to find common ground, trying to stop talking past each other, putting yourself in someone else's position, look at their experiences, and thinking about how it could have been different for them had it been, she had been on the other foot. So, and then me understanding how he feels too.
As the leader in my home, I need to teach my children. And I need to model for my children. And I need to teach them maybe about history that they're not hearing at school. Now, some of that also means that I have to teach myself history that I didn't learn growing up in school. So I've been reading a whole lot, trying to educate myself on the true history. And what I'm finding out is there's a lot of true history that's been left out of textbooks, in our teachings, in our schools here in Texas. I grew up here in Texas. The other piece of that is that I need to have courageous conversations with people of color. And I should have friends who are of color that I can have courageous conversations with, and I need them to give me some grace and know that I'm there because I don't understand. I can't possibly understand what they feel or what they're going on. So look, I ask for grace and I ask a lot of questions, and I have found in those conversations that is where my personal growth has been greatest.
I think the first thing that came to my mind was right now this is a hot topic. Like, this is on the news, it's on everyone's feed. For me, there's many important things, but the thing that kind of rang in my mind the most was that this can't become yesterday's news. And so it's doing what we can in our power to keep it at the top of the list of priorities of how things need to change. I think that sometimes with good intentions and passions, we put things on this list of agenda that we need to accomplish, and then unfortunately it kind of falters and dissipates. And I would implore people to do what they can in their power to keep it on the agenda. When the news media starts to calm down, when the feeds start to change and there's cat memes again and all those things, like, we need to remember that this is still important, and it needs to be important for a very long time, because the kind of things that we're working to undo took a very long time to get here. And so it's going to be a very long time to get past it and to move on from it.
There's also a charge I want to give to the church, and it's this: Jesus is counting on us, and He has no plan B. That's it. I love 2 Corinthians chapter 5 because when God was talking about reconciliation, the first thing that He said is be reconciled to me. You know, so the first step is that we have to have a relationship with God. So there is no one else in this world that can do this besides Christians. Nobody. So Jesus is literally saying, I'm counting on my church, and I put all of my hope in what the church will do. And so I'm convinced that whether we do it today or whether we do it tomorrow, the church will do it because God is going to make sure that we do it. The other thing is that after being reconciled to God, then we have the responsibility to be reconciled to one another. So we have to break down these barriers of assumptions. We have to be willing to step out and say things that other people may not say. And the reason why the world has been dealing with this for so long is because the church has not fully walked into it. But now I see a shift happening. And you talked about the woman at the well. That was a moment in time when literally Jesus moved the needle on a harm that had been taking place over hundreds of years, similar to what's going on right now. When he met her at Jacob's well, you know, that was neutral territory, right? That was a space where both the Jews and the Samaritans could agree that they both believed in Jacob, right? And so it was like this was a common place where they could come together and have this conversation. They could agree. And Jesus met her there at the point of agreement. So the question is, where can we agree? Can we agree that we're seeing injustices? If we can agree about that, then we can agree that we can move together as the church and continue to be the answer and not waiting on the answer to happen. The government can't do it. The psychologists can't do it. Only the church. What is one thing that you hope that everyone that is watching will take away from this?
I think what Candace said a minute ago is the most compelling thing I've heard perhaps tonight, and that is it's worth it. You have to step out of your comfort zone and go a place you hadn't been, but what you find there is more beautiful and more breathtaking than you ever expected or suspected. That it's, oh my gosh, if I don't leave the parking lot, I never know what the summit looks like. But if I leave the parking lot, I see the summit crazy. And so Candace said it's more beautiful and more astounding than you can possibly imagine. It's worth the risk. I hope that's what people hear. It's worth the risk. It's worth being uncomfortable.
I hope that people are moved by the Spirit and become passionate and consumed by the injustices, that they are called and moved to action of the mission that God has for them to rectify this all these racial injustices.
I hope people hear that no matter what they've come to believe, that the status quo is not acceptable.
I hope that those who are having a hard time, who don't want to talk about it, would sit down with me or someone that they may feel comfortable with, and because I want to know, why do you dislike my skin tone, or why do you, not looking at the noise that's going on in the streets, the protests, but why do you dislike my color, my skin? Why does that make me different? If we say we love this one God, one Father, one baptism, and He's the Father of all, and we call ourselves Christian, but yet you still dislike my skin tone, or you're afraid of me. Because I've seen people, when I come in the restroom, they don't want to go in the stall that I came out of. That's happened here at the church, and it's like, why? Why is that? That's what hardens my heart is why. I've always wanted to know why, but I never really got a real question. I know it's going to hurt when I hear it, but I just want to know why my skin color matters. We all bleed the same. We all have the same Father. We say we worship the same God. So my hope is that someone would be bold enough to just, and brave enough, it's hard, but would be brave enough to really sit down and have that conversation with me.
I hope that people watching the church, would recognize any defensiveness or guilt or any emotion as a weapon of Satan and not anything that God would use.
But at this point in the game, to be in 2020 and still having these huge gaps and these huge problems, no, it's no longer enough to say, I'm not a racist. You have to be against racism. And then on top of that, if we call ourselves Christ followers, it's a no-brainer. To God is equal parts love, and he's equal parts wrath, and he's equal parts justice, and he's equal part peace. So all of that coming together, it would be not enough for us to just say we're not racist. If we're not engaging in making a change to heal the racism that we see, whether it's systemic or doing anything in our part to make awareness or to be passionate or to bring people around the table to have those hard conversations, if you are not wanting to get uncomfortable, then I would beg the question, like, are you following Christ?
May God be glorified. I hope that God is glorified through his church. And when we all get to heaven, I hope that Jesus looks at us and says, you know what? I'm pleased with you all, my good and faithful servants. You all in your generation listened and did exactly what I called you all to do.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed and were inspired by that conversation. We have some additional resources and things you can do as you take steps against racism. 3 that I would like to highlight. One is a conference that's coming up this week on the 14th that you can still register for. It is called the Reimagine Conference, hosted by Life Anew Ministries. Life Anew was founded by Kim and Sherwin Patton, who you just saw participate in the conversation. Second, we'd like to invite you to a special Ask Any Question featuring Will Davis Jr. and Reverend Daryl Horton. It will be on July the 29th. There is a link. We're asking people to register for that. And third, I would like you to take it on yourself to have your own conversation. There's going to be a link in the resource page where you can click on it and we will set you up in a safe environment with people who would also like to have conversation. And also, I want you to be watching this week. We're going to have a special airing of the conversation you just heard in its entirety. So later in this week, you can check social media channels for that extended conversation. Now, I'd love to invite you to pray with me. Father, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining our friends as they had a conversation that wasn't easy, but was so important. Thank you for their vulnerability. Thank you for their hearts. Thank you for them sharing what truly they see and experience. Thank you for the privilege that we got to be onlookers as they poured their hearts and souls into it. God, I ask that everyone within the sound of my voice is ready to roll up their sleeves and engage. All we can do is agree to not let our perspectives and our hearts stay the same, but to open our hearts, open our minds to you in becoming racially reconciled. You are good, we love you, and we are thankful for your presence here today. It's in your Son's name that we gather, and in his name that we pray. Amen. God bless you and have a fantastic week.